thanks to the organizers for giving me some space and time to say a few words about groundwater. I'm going to dwell largely on groundwater in the urban space, but I think I come at groundwater from a slightly different perspective. I think a couple of the previous speakers referred to groundwater in a sort of indirect way. So there was reference to rise in water levels as an impact of some activities. There was reference to the springs around Karst Plateau, and I guess a few more questions indirectly referred to groundwater. Let me sort of give you the larger picture. I mean, we work on groundwater. We work exclusively on groundwater as a single point of intervention. The science of groundwater, the management of groundwater, and the governance of groundwater. Unfortunately, groundwater is an invisible resource. We hardly see it. And when we go to CSRs for funding some of our work in rural India, they often say that this doesn't interest us because the impacts are not visible. We'd rather have beautification, afforestation, farm ponds, tanks that have a visible impact. And that is the real dilemma of working on a resource which is largely invisible, but which supports a huge population, especially in India. So let me begin by talking of the larger picture. I mean, I won't go through each and every of one of the bullets that I'm putting up, but something like 1.5 billion urban dwellers across the world, urban dwellers, rely on groundwater. And I think when we look at groundwater, even in the Indian urban context, we think, okay, we are paving streets, we are putting concrete, recharge must reduce, our water levels have gone down, and so on and so forth. Now you have to bear in mind that there are several dimensions to this very argument. And one big dimension is very often the recharge that you foreclose with pavements has another side to it, which is your leaking sewers and mains. And therefore, you find in many cities in India that groundwater levels have actually risen without any conscious intervention. Now, whether that's good or bad is really a matter of looking at groundwater more closely. Let me take a step forward. And I added this slide as I was listening to some of the presentations earlier. And the reason I added this slide is I gave a presentation in Colombo about 7 months back, where a new research theme at a global level has been set up under the CGIAR program, which looks at aquifers as ecosystems, or aquifers and ecosystems, and which really looks at the trade-offs between the human and environmental needs from groundwater. And then, you know, as a part of Aquadam's work, we've done some interesting analysis on, if you kind of take the axis of human usage and extraction of groundwater as the y-axis, and ecosystem and ecosystem services as the x-axis, then this is how India figures in this larger debate on aquifers and ecosystems. And I'm not, again, going through the entire system. And you can then almost divide India into some kind of an aquifer ecosystem typology. So let me again step forward with this. If you look at India, 50% of urban water in India is groundwater. 50% of urban water supply is groundwater. Does it figure in the larger debate? Unfortunately, no. Well, I would say 70 to 80% of rural water in India is groundwater. But let's leave that apart for the moment. And then you have, you know, different categorizations of, you know, what's happening in the class 1, class 2 cities and so on and so forth. But let's take a step forward. Let's look at what's happened to Pune city. And I'm going to dwell a little more on some of these slides. If you look at Pune city in, say, somewhere around 1917, then there was a small core city there, and it was usually like in many cities, like in many growing cities, it was largely an agrarian landscape, a rural landscape. Now, as a city grows, you find that there is some groundwater use inside the city, There's a lot of groundwater use outside the city. Now, as the city grows further and the demands grow, then people think about surface water. People think about bringing water from outside into the city. Now, as the city grows further and you get the so-called peri-urban development around the city, which doesn't necessarily have a municipal supply or formal supply, you get the peri-urban landscape in large cities in India, in lots of cities in India, depend entirely on groundwater. Then we talk of bringing water from further and further away, from rivers, from dams. And at the same time, we must remember that the groundwater story in the rural hinterlands around the urban growth is also happening. You have a dam, we have Khadakwasla, but does that mean we don't use groundwater? I have counted 100 bore wells drilled in Pune city alone. I have counted 100 rigs in Pune city alone 2 years ago when we had some water, 3 years ago when we had a water scarcity in summer. So this is the story typically maybe of Pune, but of many cities in India. And I'll keep clicking, you know, the city grows and you have these various zones coming around the city, and the groundwater story goes unnoticed. The groundwater story goes unnoticed because we perceive that our dependence is on surface water. And we talk of Khadakwasla, we talk of the catchment areas of Khadakwasla. But do we talk of groundwater inside the city? Do we talk of aquifers as systems inside cities? And the obvious answer is no. It is citizens as well as the so-called larger governance ecosystem is as insensitive to the issue as anybody else. Now, I think the more important thing I want to flag here is we forget that the aquifers that feed all these informal sources of water supply receive their recharge from certain areas, which are called natural recharge areas. And you might have natural recharge areas around here. What are the natural recharge areas of aquifers in Mumbai? What are the natural recharge areas of aquifers in Pune? Do we have the answer? Do we even think about this? We think about hillside hill slopes. There is a debate on hillside hill slopes, but there is no debate on aquifers in Indian cities. And that's one of the reasons why we have actually now taken up upon ourselves to work in some of the urban centers of India. And for that, I've recently written up a paper along with Dr. Mihir Shah, who is a member of the Planning Commission before for the 12th five-year plan. And we have this theory where we are looking at cities not so much only in terms of their populations, but in terms of how their geography unfolds. So we go from nuclear cities to growing cities to expanding cities to urban agglomerations. Now, you could look at these cities as, you could look at this as a typology of cities, but you could also look at this in terms of how they grow over time. And one of the premises that we find is as small towns morph into larger towns and then into larger cities, groundwater use tends to stabilize. Especially once it goes into the sort of agglomeration stage, there is very little information on what happens after agglomeration. For instance, in the city of Bangalore where we are working, it's really difficult to say if groundwater use has gone up, has it remained stable, or has it tapered off as a consequence of Kaveri water coming into Bangalore. Maybe the same holds true of Pune city. Now, all this, mind you, is happening in the context of a hydrogeological typology. It depends, groundwater depends on the sort of underground. What are the rocks underground? And a whole lot of us talk about biodiversity. We talk of agricultural diversity. But when we talk water, do we really talk of lithodiversity? This is a map that we have simplified at Aquadam to represent India's lithodiversity. And it's as lithodiverse as any other country in the world. 85% of all rock types, of all global rock types are found in India. And as a consequence of this, you get a very interesting Indian typology. So this is just a cartoon of how groundwater looks in the Himalayan mountain region. We have classified differently sized cities in these 6 different typologies. I'll quickly run through them. This is the Indo-Gangetic alluvial plains, which have a very different setting as compared to the Himalayas. You can see here that 32% of all the talukas fall in the extensive alluvium setting. Then we have where we are sitting, the volcanic regime of northwestern India. And here again, I mean, this is just a cartoon to depict what's happening around cities, and I won't dwell too much in time. I'll just take a moment and in brief tell you what has happened around Pune city. This is again not very detailed studies, but indicative studies going back to 1970s and now. So if you look at the western part of Pune, which is largely the Western Ghats, we have shallow aquifers that are relatively stable. We still have aquifers that are relatively stable. In the central core city, the old city, we find that the water levels have come up. Why have they come up? It's not because somebody has programmed a good recharge program. It's only because we have leaking sewers, leaking mains that add to the induced recharge in these areas. In fact, the water quality in some of the central parts of Pune, the old parts of Pune, is extremely poor, pathetic. If you go to the eastern fringes, where the expansion has been significant in agricultural areas, you find that there's been a water level decline in the shallow aquifers. The deeper aquifers across the city have witnessed a water level decline. Now, what is the lesson from this? The lesson from this is we need a very structured, systematic approach to looking at our aquifers, looking at our recharge. I'll come to the South Indian part, which looks something like this. It's got statistics, but we are doing some interesting work in Bangalore, and I'd like to dwell on that a little bit before I end. So this particular aquifer map, which is just one part of a larger study I'm showing, has been compiled on the basis on the basis of citizens' information, citizens' participation. This has nothing to do with a conventional scientific study. We have picked up this information, historic information, and we have compiled it into some kind of an aquifer map. And on the basis of this aquifer map, we are now actually going forward in a part of Bangalore city, southeastern part of Bangalore city, in trying to work out a systematic recharge program that involves citizens' participation as well as the so-called government entities that work in these areas. And then a few more. So I'll kind of end my two-bit here by saying that you can divide India, you can divide urban India into a kind of hydrogeological typology. And these are just some indications of the typology of urban aquifers in India. And if you look at the transition zones, for example, there are some interesting, so Bagdogra, Bhopal, Bhuj, Gurgaon, Haldwani, Kalka near Shimla are locations where you get multiple aquifer systems. So an approach in the transition zones will be different from how you look at groundwater in the Himalayan zone, will be different from what you do in Pune, will be different from what you do in Bangalore. So as a summary, you might ask, what is the commonality then? What is a kind of a common process that we could adopt across this diverse typology? And for that, there are three phases that one can look at. The first phase is more of science. The second phase is more of action on two fronts. One on the recharge side, second on a participatory groundwater management program through citizens movements, managing demand, and then some kind of a regulatory framework. Usually we jump to a regulatory framework before we do phase 1 and phase 2. So this is something that we are already experimenting with in many parts of India. I'll conclude with this particular slide about Aquadam's work, where we've worked across this entire typology over the last 16, 17 years. These are locations where we have worked. We've worked largely in the rural space. It's only in the last 3 or 4 years that we've begun to engage with the urban space, with urban groundwater. And much of our work is through an approach called aquifer-based groundwater management, involving participation from the subjects of, so citizens like here, or in villages, villagers, farmers. We do a lot of training and capacity building. Our approach is essentially science, but decision support science. And we are increasingly drawn into the policy space on groundwater in India. Thank you very much.
Question is actually, what are the kind of agencies that you're dealing with generally? Like, how do you find yourself placed? I mean, in your work, are you dealing more with like private agencies or and also, what's the sort of response from the public agencies that you deal with? I mean,
So I think, one of the reasons why I've got 4 bullets here is we've got a strategy in dealing with different agencies. So when we look at aquifer-based groundwater management, it's largely communities. We work with communities. We don't work with individuals because we want to move away from individual siting of wells towards an approach to aquifers. We work with the industry. What we essentially work with the industry, where the industry interfaces with the rural. That's where much of our work is. We don't work with the industry which calls upon us to maybe provide a solution for their water siting or water sourcing. In the policy space, we are slightly isolated because reluctantly and increasingly so we are being sort of recognized as the leading think tank on the science side of groundwater linked to action on groundwater. So we have created that space in policy, and the aquifer mapping program, which is one of the hallmarks of the 12th five-year plan and which is now being rolled out under this government as well, has been a brainchild essentially of the work that we've done in the rural space.
Maybe is this working? Yeah. Maybe I'm sort of dwelling on something which he spoke about also, but I'd just like to know something more about the decision support work that you've been doing, because I think that is something which is probably unique to your own work, maybe at various scales, community or whatever.
So like I said, I mean it's essentially how you define the word community, and I think much of our science has driven communities to take somewhat different decisions as compared to what they would have if we had adopted a business as usual approach. And so one big program we have, for instance, is the Springs Initiative, which began with our work on springs in one little village in Uttarakhand with another partner organization. And all of this work has been in partnership. We have not done a single bit of this work alone. Usually it is in the form of there's a community, or either it's a village or an urban pocket, and there's another implementing agency. So we come in, provide the science, provide the capacity building, and also do a lot of handholding. Much of our work has been in the handholding mode. And so there's no single model. So our work in Meghalaya, for example, with communities is through the government. We are working on something like 5,000 springs in the state of Meghalaya. In Sikkim, we did it through the government, but it was more of a pilot around 300 springs. Whereas in Uttarakhand, it's more like 20 springs. So the scale of work is different. But the approach to work is an aquifer-based approach, which involves demystified science and how do you create a decision support system from that science so that communities can begin to think differently first and then to act slightly differently as we go along.
Is there any policy regarding this aquifers ground recharge or something, urban areas, related to urban areas, or is it being developed?
Well, there is very little in terms of policy on urban groundwater. In fact, much of what the Central Groundwater Board does, the premier institution in India, is in the rural space. And I'm actually advising them now. I'm actually advising the government of India to restructure both the Central Water Commission and Saili might be interested in this, Central Water Commission and the Central Groundwater Board. And one of the big gaps with Central Groundwater Board is that they have no clue on how to proceed in the urban space. And therefore, I think there is a need to develop a similar model like what we have done in the urban space through a participatory approach to urban aquifers. Well, there are bits and pieces of regulation, but there is no regulation essentially because groundwater itself is a bit of a blind spot, both in practice and policy.
Yeah, I mean, watershed projects, so-called watershed projects, they are being like implemented all over everywhere. So, I mean, I want to ask you, like, what is your opinion? Are they being done in the right way, and are they effective in So one of their major objective is groundwater recharges, I understand.
Yeah.
So what is your take on this?
Yeah, so we've been able to influence many of the watershed projects in India, but it took us 15 years to almost influence, to say that recharge is not just about creating a pond or a tank. It's about creating the pond or a tank in the right place with the right objective. Second, recharge is not just about putting water in the ground, it's about how you manage that additional water. Because very often what happens in watershed projects is there is an additional inequity created through harvesting water. So this, slogans like "Gaon ka pani gaon mein, khet ka pani khet mein" don't really work. They don't even work theoretically, they don't work practically. Because if you harvest all the water in a watershed, theoretically you wouldn't have any water left for downstream flows. Second, much of the watershed programs have dwelt on the engineering side of structures and not so much on the location site specific side of structures. So just to cite one quick example, we did a lot of work in Palampur in Himachal Pradesh, where an agreement was brokered between a panchayat which had a spring, and the spring was supplying water to the Palampur Municipal Council. And this simple study of hydrogeology was able to broker an agreement between the panchayat and the Palampur Municipal Council for the Palampur Municipal Council to invest on that spring which was supplying them that water. Now we found two things around that spring. One was the forest department came to us and asked us, can we do watershed development? We want to be a part of this whole agreement. And we told them that it's pristine forest, you don't need to do anything. So they came and told us, नहीं हमारे पास 10 लाख रुपया है, हम इसको खर्चा करना चाहते हैं. तो हमने उनको कहा वो 10 लाख रुपया आप उसमें डाल दो बैंक में, और उसका जो इंटरेस्ट आएगा वो ये बोहल पंचायत को दे दो. So they were still insistent. Then we said, the problem with you is you want to look at structures, you want to look at structures as an input. But sort of listening to the previous discussions, can we look at conservation? Can we just look at conservation, just keeping what it is as a form of investment? We'll need to think how to invest those 10 lakh rupees in that. So that's just an example of not doing watershed as a sort of as a solution.
Should essentially be managed for recharge of groundwater.
Absolutely.
So the entire forest management has also to change.
Yeah.
Its primary objective has to be
Yeah.
recharging of the groundwater aquifers.
But sir, my premise there again is, usually what happens is it gets polarized, that the forest department says कि पूरा का पूरा forest में recharge हो रहा है. Now we have a solution which actually says that even within the forest area, 1000 hectares का forest है, then which 20 hectares or which 100 hectare patches are really those patches that will serve the purpose of recharge, and that can be brought in this whole articulation, additional articulation, whether it's urban or rural.
No, whatever area is in the catchment, if that area is entirely maintained green, it is going to give more water than rainfall alone provides.
Sure.
So that role of forest should be appreciated in this entire thing. And we cannot have sort of water without forest management. This is the basic of the entire discussion. Because it is a hydrological cycle, which is more important.
Unfortunately, aquifers don't figure in this whole debate. It's just forest and water. I'm just trying to bring that dimension in.
Yeah, Himanshu, it's always nice to interact with you on this topic, because we lot of time we interact in Delhi, but first time we are, I think, meeting in Pune. My basic question is that, can you please enlighten the urban water cycle briefly, how the groundwater depletion is affecting our perennial rivers?
Yeah.
Do you have that emphasis?
So in fact, that was one of the reasons I added that first slide, that you kind of look at large parts of India, then primarily, I mean, it's not just urban, it's also rural. That the concept that if your aquifers are in some kind of a pristine state, then they are going to keep your streams and rivers alive. Your streams and rivers with good quality water doesn't figure in our mindset. Our mindset is about, if there is water in our streams and rivers, our wells will be intact. It's actually the cycle, the hydrological cycle doesn't work that way. The hydrological cycle works exactly the opposite. If there is sufficient water in your aquifers, only then are your streams and rivers going to be alive. 8 months, perennial. Now, because we have such a lot of groundwater extraction, and especially in urban areas, you are foreclosing recharge and we are extracting from aquifers. All our catchments have run dry. One. Second, we have disturbed our catchments so much that the interface between aquifers and surface water, watersheds, have completely been cut off. So that, in a simplistic sense, is what Saili is trying to point to. And unless we bring this cycle back in its entirety, I don't think we'll actually be able to look at the sustainability of urban water resources in India. Sorry, I've taken a little longer than expected.
Actually, as a landscape architect, we never get such data when we sit and design. Like when even in academic studios or in practice, like whenever we say groundwater table, we just get a small drawing which shows that this is the groundwater, and that's what we have to dwell on to for the entire project of maybe 100 acres or 200 acres and so on. So is your organization is doing some publication work where such, because it's very dynamic, the data about water is very dynamic. Maybe this year it's something different, that year. So do you have a system where you come up with such data and publish it, which can be used by designers?
Well, we don't, like I said, urban is something really new for us in a systematic way. But largely we are doing two things, on our data side. One is, in the next 6-7 months, we'll have all our data, Aquadam's own data, on our website, which will go live. All data on groundwater where we have worked. Second, we are pushing both the state and the central government, because I'm also advising the central government, to put all groundwater data in an open domain. Already the CGWB puts this data, but their data is not at scale. But we want to now tie up local level data with the regional monitoring of Government of India, Government of Maharashtra, and come up with a consolidated database that could be used by the general people at large. So we are trying to push on these two fronts on the data side. But if there's specific data that you need, and we might have, we are ready to share that data, because personally at Aquadam we don't believe in intellectual property rights. We are not intellectuals. We don't have any property, and therefore we don't have rights. So our data is open to all of you.